What's up, players? It's Grant here to reveal coffee number 3 in season 16 of Leaderboard. I am not the one that roasted the coffee, but this did come from one of my all-time favorite roasters. They are unfortunately one of the most popular roasters in North America, so they were so busy that we couldn't find a time that fit to do this reveal video. But I am still here to help. So, coffee number 3 was submitted by Sey Coffee. They're out of Bushwick, which is in Brooklyn in New York in the United States of America. It was founded back in 2013, but back then they were actually known as Lofted Coffee because they were roasting in a loft. Even in 2013, their roast stood out on a table of tons of samples just as much as their coffees do today. Onto the coffee. The coffee was this stunner Ethiopian coffee. Obviously from Africa, it is an Ethiopian coffee from the Hamesho washing station, which is in Bensa, Sidama. This one was a slight curveball, but we kind of hoped that it was a slam dunk for everybody and one of the easier ones, as it is a honey processed coffee. It is also above 1,600 meters above sea level, and this unfortunately is not a decaf, although it would be one of the most delicious decafs. How would we identify this coffee playing the game? What you should do when you're playing Leaderboard is have a look at all the coffees first. With this coffee in particular, just by looking at it and by source of deductions, you can pretty much figure out what this coffee is. So the first thing that you notice is that they are really tiny seeds. So that's going to tell you two things. One is that it's grown at a relatively high elevation. So the higher elevation you have, typically the smaller seeds that you'll get and the more dense that they'll be. But also the fact that they are relatively uniform and quite small, that's going to tell me that it is more than likely from Ethiopia. There may be a case, where there's some other varieties that are super tiny, but just looking at the answer key, those varieties aren't in there. So the next thing that I would do is to have a good idea of the processing that was used just by looking at it. So when you're looking at this coffee, you can see that there is relatively uniform coloring across them all, and it's more of like a matte texture. That being said, there are still some seeds where in the fissure there's a little bit of white in there, so there's still some of that silver skin. So this tells me it's probably a honey process, but it could be a naturally processed coffee. In the case of a washed coffee, you're gonna have seeds that look like this, where there is that little bit of silver skin, but across all of the seeds, and all of the seeds will have like a bit less uniformity in the color and a rougher texture, whereas with this, it's a little bit smoother, a little bit more uniform. I'm gonna guess that this is honey. Another thing is when you open up this bag of coffee, you probably got a waft of citrus and a bunch of florality, and that's just gonna put my mind in the place where this is probably an Ethiopian coffee. That could get you in a lot of trouble if you already have your mind made up, but if you just have that in the back of your head when you get into tasting, it can help you narrow down your options of the coffee. Okay, so let's get into the fun part of figuring out what this coffee is, which is tasting it. So off the hop in the cup, things that are going to tell me where this is from. It is floral, like super floral. It has a lot of citrus, like ripe citrus, and then I get a lot of stone fruit personally, and it does have this sort of tea-like quality to it. Those are going to tell me right away. This is an Ethiopian Landrace variety, but it is more than likely an Ethiopian coffee. And if you're looking at the answer key and using that deducing with what you've seen in the seeds, it's going to confirm to me that that is an Ethiopian coffee. So if you want to take it even farther with figuring out the region, this is really difficult. Like, I'm not gonna lie, we put that in the game knowing how hard that it is. With Ethiopian coffees, we try to make it a little bit easier. So your choices here are Gadev Guji Sidama as one choice, and Harar. So coffees from Harar are traditionally naturally processed. In my experience, it really reminds me of cherries and chocolate. That chocolate note is so distinct, way more distinct than it is in these other regions where I find it's like fruit forward and then you have those chocolatey qualities afterwards. But coffees from Harar with the natural processing, it's just like chocolate bomb and fruit, and that tells me right away that it's from there. This does not have that. This is way more on like the more delicate citrus, stone fruit, floral side of things. Now, if you're trying to figure out process in the cup, this can be a little bit more challenging. So with this one, the texture is quite light, but it does have a little bit more of like a silky sort of vibe to it, but it's not incredibly heavy. That's just going to kind of confirm my thoughts that this is a honey processed coffee. So that's it from me. Hopefully that's helpful. And as a thank you for listening to me ramble, Millie says hi. Happy gaming.